I'm actually super pumped about this one because I just find this like very interesting. So for any, like if you follow fitness at all, right, which I'm assuming you do if you're here with me, I'm sure you've heard about VO2 max training. You've definitely heard about zone 2 cardio at this point and kind of the importance of these things from like a longevity standpoint, right? So essentially the big thing I think that kind of drove this along is Peter Attia came along. He wrote his book Outlive, and he really started to talk heavily about the correlation between VO2 max and longevity. He also talks a lot about zone 2 training and longevity in terms of like mitochondrial health and overall general health. So these two things are super popular right now. And the thing that I really don't like about the whole VO2 max conversation and the zone 2 training, people are really starting to key in on this, obviously, right? Because they're seeing there's like money to be made. So a lot of companies are now offering like VO2 max training, and they'll tell you that they can essentially determine exactly what zone of training you need to be in to be at your peak fat burn zone and the things like that are gonna help you lose fat faster and all this stuff. And that's really the problem I have here is that, I guess, approach is really wrong and it's really misconstrued. And people have tried to take this, okay, if we're in fat burning zone, we're gonna burn more fat more efficiently, and it's really just not the case. So there's a lot of things I wanted to go through here tonight. I think this is just like a great topic, super interesting. It's a little bit obviously fitness related, but we can also tie the food in here too in terms of, okay, like how do we understand our VO2 max? How do we understand what zones to train in? And we'll go through what the hell is a VO2 max, what is a zone, all that stuff. We'll obviously cover that. How can we use these different zones and these different training methods to optimize your health and your longevity and all that stuff in the best way, right? So we can actually use this stuff to help manage your cholesterol levels, manage your blood sugar levels, manage your heart health, manage your brain health, manage your circulation throughout your body, manage your body's ability to increase the uptake of oxygen, which is obviously great for everything, since oxygen is literally without it you die, right? So the more of that we can have the system circulating through, probably the better. So that's all the stuff we want to talk about here tonight, which I'm super pumped to do. So if we just kind of start from the top here, right? What is your VO2 max? Really plain and simple, your VO2 max is the maximum volume of oxygen your body can deliver and use during intense efforts. So essentially you get to a point where you're working really hard, and we've all been there, right? We're working really hard, we're running. If we pick up the speed of that run, essentially at some point, our ability to intake oxygen is going to cap out, right? So you're going to hit that point where you're like, holy shit, I can't catch my breath anymore. That's your VO2 max. So if you start with a walk, you get into a jog, you get into a run, you get into a sprint, at some point you're going to hit that level where like no longer can your body oxygenate that process, and then you're going to die off at that point, and you're maxing out on your heart rate and that type of thing. So that's essentially what it is, right? Is it's like how long can you utilize oxygen? And typically people that are in better shape can go further, faster, longer while still using oxygen and not totally running out of breath. And if you think about the fit person versus the fat person and you had them run down the street, it would make it a lot further down the street than the fat person would, unfortunately, because the fit person has a higher VO2 max, which means that they can just, their body can utilize more oxygen and deliver it to your body for longer, right? During more intense forms of exercise. So basically what this reflects is it reflects your cardiovascular fitness. So obviously your heart's ability to work properly, your mitochondrial efficiency, which is your ability to create energy, which is obviously huge, and then biological age. And then again, a high VO2 max obviously means that you have greater endurance, a faster recovery time, and that's why it's important. That's why like you never want to just lift, right? Because if you're just lifting weights, you may be getting stronger, but you're not improving your endurance, you're not improving on your VO2 max, you're not improving on your heart health, you're not improving on your ability to recover. So that's another cool thing about this VO2 max is like having better cardiovascular endurance actually helps you recover from all the weight training and the things that you're doing faster as well. So you get faster recovery, you get a lower disease risk, you get a longer life, right? So pretty important, right? So basically we're gonna decrease our disease risk, we're gonna live longer, and we're gonna live better the longer we live, obviously, right? Especially right now, the big push is for like longevity, right? You hear that term everywhere. So VO2 max is primarily linked to longevity. VO2 max is the biggest predictor of essentially how long and how well you're going to live. So the higher that VO2 max, the better chances are that you're going to live a better, longer life, basically. So here's the ranges across the board here. So average VO2 max would be like a 35 to a 45. Fit people are going to get about a 45 to a 55, and people in the elite category 60 plus. And if we go down the line here, obviously it decreases a little bit with age, but ideally, right, from a longevity target standpoint, keeping VO2 max above the 40 milliliters per kilogram per minute for as long as possible, for as independent of age, right? The longer you live, you still want to keep that VO2 max higher. That's going to be that longevity target that you want to aim for. I'm going to honestly say you're never going to want to really be below 45, right? Like, why go below that elite level? And even if we're looking here, like 45 at an age as when you're young is the minimum level that you'd have to be fit. And then obviously beyond that, we're increasing our level of fitness, but you're never going to really want to be in this average range. You're never going to want to be at the low end of fit. We want to be like high end of fit into that elite range, right? And that's not that hard to do. And again, it's just like the type of training that you're doing. So obviously that's a little bit of what we'll talk through tonight as well. But definitely a great predictor of longevity. So we want to make sure, ideally, everybody's going to want to be elite, right? For average age 20 to 29, you're going 60 plus milliliters per kilogram per minute. And this is how much oxygen your body can uptake. Between 30 to 39, you're going 55 plus, and then obviously we basically lose 5 points every 10 years, essentially. So really aiming for those markers would be, from a longevity standpoint, exactly what you want to do is you want to be in that elite category, okay? And then why that's going to matter, again, strong predictor of all-cause mortality and disease. So believe it or not, the higher that VO2 max, the lower your risk of disease, the lower your risk of dying from random causes, whatever they may be. Here's what's probably going to be most relevant today for most people who are interested in this and actively working toward improving their body composition and their health and their ability to live that longer life is increased efficiency with fat burning. We're going to get improved cognitive function, and we get an improvement in metabolic health, which is your body's ability to utilize blood sugar and metabolize fats and things like that. That's another huge push nowadays too, is that I think they've found that like maybe only 10% of Americans are actually metabolically healthy. Mostly everybody in the American population is going to have some kind of a dysregulated cholesterol levels, lipid levels, blood sugar regulation, blood pressure, things like that, right? So this is another great thing that VO2 max, working on improving it, will help, is it helps improve your metabolic health. So it improves your cholesterol, it improves your body's ability to utilize sugars in the blood, it improves your blood pressure, all of these things that are huge markers of health and markers of like longevity and function. So obviously the longer we can stay healthy metabolically, the better the chances we have in living longer as well, right? So that VO2 max, kind of the engine that fuels everything from a performance and a lifespan standpoint. So again, if we're interested in longevity and in optimization at all, like this is going to be the thing, right? Like we're going to need to prioritize this. There's definitely some zones that we need to be in, and different zones are going to train different things, right? So if we start with zone 1, that's about 50 to 60% of your VO2 max, right? Zone 2 is 60 to 70. Zone 2 gets a ton of play, all right? So we're going to definitely dive into zone 2 a little bit here. Zone 3 maybe gets looked over from time to time, but that's going to be that 70 to 80% of your max heart rate, basically, your VO2 max. And then we've got zone 4, zone 5, and that's at 80 to 100, where in terms of here, like that's where we're really pushing the pace. And when we do these super high intensity exercises, then that's where we're pushing our ability to increase our oxygen uptake, right? Because you're forcing the body to adapt to, hey, this thing's working really hard. And the more times you sprint down the block, the further you're going to get every time, kind of thing, right? So that's that VO2 max training. The zone 2 is more like a super light jog around the block, where it's like, hey, I could do that all day. It's not really going to tire me out, but there's definitely some benefits there too. So from the zone 2 training, what we build is we build that aerobic base, right? So we're definitely building just some heart health, some endurance, and then that's obviously contributing to longevity. But here's the thing that gets confused, is the fat oxidation. A lot of times people will call this like, you're training in zone 2, you're training in your fat burn zone. There's a difference between fat burning and utilizing fat for fuel. We're going to get into that in a minute here, but just take note of that. What you use as a fuel source doesn't necessarily mean again, fat oxidation doesn't necessarily mean fat loss. So we're going to get into that in a minute. And then again, if we're getting into these higher zones, now here's where we're really testing, or we're improving our ability to increase the body's uptake of oxygen. And that's really what we want, right? This is where we're pushing that level of fitness. Now, zone 2 is going to push that mitochondrial health. So zone 2 will help to increase mitochondria. It will also help with fat oxidation. So there's some really cool benefits there in terms of like cholesterol management, triglyceride management and stuff that I'm going to go over in a second. But so the main benefit we get from the zone 2 is that we increase the body's production of mitochondria. And the more mitochondria we have in our body, the greater the ability we have to create energy. Okay, so you may know, if you've ever taken a science class, like the mitochondria, as it's called, like your little energy factory within the cell. And the more of these energy factories that we have within the cell, obviously the more energy we can produce, right? That's the idea here, is that we use this low and slow zone 2 training to improve our body's ability to burn energy, right? And then we use our higher intensity trainings like our zone 4, our zone 5 to really push the limit on our body's ability and our heart's ability to pump blood and oxygen. And the more oxygen we can uptake, obviously, the higher we can push our level of fitness, right? That's the idea here with this zone-based training and training toward like improving our VO2 max. So this is where we're really going to get that done, is in these higher zones of training. So now, like the best training combo, because again, it's like you don't want to just do super high intensity training all the time. You also don't just want to do zone 2 all the time. You need to find a balance, right? Sleep is great. We don't want to be sleeping 24 hours a day. Work is great for our bank account. We don't want to be working 24 hours a day, right? Like we want to make sure we've got balance. We can create balance within our cardiovascular training here through the zones, okay? So the best training combo, or a great way to consider this training combo, is this, right? Zone 2, we want to do a few times a week. So probably 2 to 3. So I think zone 2, you'd be fine to do 2 to 3 times per week. Why? Because it's time consuming, right? So we need to be in this 45 to 90 minute range to get the max benefit from our zone 2 training. And again, that's at like 60 to 70% maximum heart rate. So all you got to do for that max heart rate is 220 minus your age. And if you know your true VO2 max, this might actually be changed. It might be a little bit different, because if you know your true VO2 max, you know your true max heart rate, you're going to get a better idea. But it's probably going to still be somewhere in that range of 220 minus your age, right? So if you just go about that, you think, okay, hey, like for me, I'm 38, but let's just say I'm 40. For 220 minus 40 is 180. So my max heart rate is about 180. I times that by 0.65, and I know that I want to train in about like around that 130 beats per minute mark, or whatever it might be, right? But again, it is time consuming, right? 45 to 90 minutes that's a workout session for most people, right? So we'd have to dedicate that entire time to the zone 2 training. And then we get into our zone 4. That's more interval-based training, right? So we can do that 1 or 2 times a week, because it is quite taxing on the body. It's taxing on the nervous system. I did some pretty intense interval training after I looked all this stuff up last week. Motivated me to go do some intervals. And I'll tell you, like, it smoked me. I was tired the next day. I was sore. It's a different stimulus, right? It's not something that you're going to be able to do every day unless you train yourself to be able to be more consistent with it. If you've never done interval training and you've never really gone high heart rate recently, like, I don't recommend just jumping right onto the treadmill and just doing sprints today. Let's work our way up to that, right? So that's going to get up to this like 85 to 90% of max heart rate. Okay, so that's obviously, we're getting right up there. We're getting pretty close to that max. And then obviously we've got our strength training, huge piece of the puzzle here. And remember, like, your heart rate's still going to be up during strength training. So a lot of strength training will probably be in that zone 2 range anyway, because if you're keeping that heart rate going in about, whatever, for me, 130 beats per minute, that's probably pretty standard for the circuit training workouts. If I'm holding my heart rate at around that 130 mark while I train for 45 to 60 minutes, we're still getting an output there, right? Or we're still getting a benefit there. So if we can do some kind of compound lifts and things like that, obviously it's great from a muscular standpoint. It's great from a metabolic efficiency standpoint, meaning it's great for us to be able to utilize better blood sugar. It helps to regulate our blood pressure. It helps to regulate our cholesterol levels and all of these things. But we also get a heart health benefit from it too, because your heart rate is still up. So that's kind of how we can go about that, right? Couple sessions a week on zone 2, one session a week doing intervals, and then a heavy strength training focus. And honestly, I would probably say, if we're being ideal here, like 4 to 5 sessions per week of strength training would be great. 7 days in a week. We did 4 strength training sessions, 2 zone 2 sessions, and we throw some intervals in before those strength training sessions or after. That would be ideal. So that's our best training combo that you can work through. And then that way we're supporting a little bit of everything. We're working on our cardiovascular health, our heart health, that mitochondrial biogenesis, right, with the zone 2. We've got our zone 4 for the increasing our VO2 max capacity. And then we've got our strength training for increasing our strength, which is also incredible from a longevity standpoint as well. And then here's the real thing that I wanted to cover. And this is the one that's been pissing me off lately, because I keep seeing people like advertising this stuff online for you're finding your fat burning zone. So it's like, you're going to come into our place and we're going to do a VO2 max test on you. And we're going to tell you exactly the zone that you need to train in for max fat burn capacity, right? And the myth here is that you're going to burn more body fat in a lower heart rate zone. So basically the way the body works is we utilize fats for fuel when our heart rate is lower. Okay, so as I'm sitting right here talking to you, I'm predominantly running off stored energy in terms of fat because my heart rate is not up. Now, as my heart rate increases, the need for energy speeds up. All right, so fats are a slow burning fuel. Carbohydrates are a fast burning fuel. So as my heart rate speeds up and as my need for energy speeds up, now I'm going to utilize more carbohydrate for fuel. It's never one or the other, except for maybe at like really high intensities, you're probably running specifically off carbohydrate. But like right now, as I'm sitting here, I'm running off of like mostly fat, probably a little bit of carbs. As my heart rate goes up and I'm doing something like a zone 2 training, I'm still running off mostly fats and a little bit of carbohydrate. So what people are going to try to tell you is that you should be training in this low heart rate zone more often because it's great for fat burning. But that's not how this works, okay? So yes, you can be utilizing that a little bit more fats as a fuel source. That doesn't mean that you're losing fat, all right? So the reality of the situation is that total fat loss is 100% about overall calorie deficit, okay? Not the fuel source that you use in the hour that you're in the gym. How fat loss works is that you need to be at a calorie deficit over the course of minutes, hours, days, weeks, years, right? And the best way to do this is to burn a lot of calories, all right? Now, think about it this way. If I do zone 2 at a very low heart rate for 20 minutes, I'm not going to burn that many calories. If I go jump on a treadmill and I run intervals for 15 minutes, I'm going to burn way more calories, right? Because my heart rate's going to be way higher. There's going to be a way greater energy output. And that over the course of time is going to contribute a lot higher to fat loss than 2 every day, okay? And if you want an example of this, think about like the fittest people that you see. I'm just thinking of like in the general sports community. Who are the most jacked and shredded people you've ever seen? Sprinters. Sprinters are the most jacked people, men and women, I've ever seen. Okay? How much time do you think a sprinter spends training in a low heart rate zone at a slow and steady pace? Probably 0. Because if you were doing slow, steady zone 2 training, you would be training getting slower. That's not what sprinters do. Sprinters move as fast as they can all the time. They sprint as fast as they can, they run as fast as they can, they lift weights as fast as they can. Everything for them is about speed. So their heart rate's always going to be really high and they're always going to be utilizing a large amount of carbohydrate for that fuel source to support all of their training. That doesn't mean that they're fat because they don't ever train in a fat burn zone, right? So if we look at it, that's the complete opposite of what I guess this whole zone, fat burn zone training would be suggesting. And then the other kind of community that I look at is marathon runners. So if we look at the top marathon runners in the world, how lean are those people? They're stick figures. They got no muscle or fat on their body, right? Because they go at high intensities for a very long period of time. So they run almost predominantly off carbohydrate for the entirety of their race, which for them is 2 hours at this point. But the reality here is they're never in that low heart rate zone either because they're always pushing it to the max. So you think, okay, that person goes out and they run a marathon in 2 hours, but they're basically at a zone 4, zone 5 the entire time. Their VO2 max is so high and they've trained their body to be able to uptake so much oxygen that they can run at almost a maximum heart rate for a very extended period of time. That person burns a ton of calories in that 2-hour run. All right. And none of them are coming from fat. They're all coming from carbohydrate, right? So they're going to be on a very high carbohydrate diet during this whole time, and they're still going to be super lean. Now, I'm not trying to shit on anybody here, but if you look at who's at the back of the pack of marathons, it's always the people who are generally a little bit less fit. And if you look, their body composition is not going to be as good. And if you assume, hey, they're running a marathon in 5 hours, they're probably running more in that zone 2 heart rate zone. They're probably not getting up into a super high heart rate zone. They're probably running at a very modest, comfortable, moderate pace, which is why it's taking them longer. But they would also be considered more in that fat burn zone, and clearly they're not getting the same benefit that someone who's running, basically sprinting a marathon would be, right? So if we want to take examples from this, if you look at the people, and even athletes, right? Like athletes train at very high intensities all the time. They don't train low, slow, steady. They don't do that. That's not how you train as an athlete. They train at high intensities. The heart rate is high. They're burning a ton of calories. Their training is being fueled by carbohydrate, but they're burning a ton of calories. That's the one consistency with all of these people, is if you look at their training methods, they're doing it at a high intensity, which means they're burning a ton of calories. And as a result, they're very lean and they're usually very muscular. And then if you look at Sally on the elliptical that you see at the gym that gets on there for 60 minutes every day and goes at a slow and steady pace, she's typically not super lean and not super jacked. And she trains more in that zone 2 every day. So we want to think about it that way. At the end of the day, fat loss comes down to calories burned versus calories consumed. If I've got 1 hour to train and I go in there and I go twice as hard as the person beside me, I'm going to burn twice the amount of calories and I'm going to get twice the result. And that's the long and short of that whole situation. Hopefully that kind of put everything in perspective, right? And then like we have here, fat oxidation does not equal fat loss, right? Thermodynamics rules the roost here, right? So when calories burned are higher than calories consumed, fat loss is the situation. Now, that's the fat loss thing. There's some really cool reasons why zone 2 is still very helpful, all right? So zone 2 can be very helpful from like a lipid profile optimization, which literally just means like managing your cholesterol levels. Although zone 2 is not going to be great from a getting you super lean and jacked and burning fat or a fat loss standpoint, it's still utilizing fat for fuel. Okay, so when we're utilizing more fats for fuel, we're essentially having to pull from your cholesterol levels and your triglyceride levels that are within your body. So we can actually get a nice cholesterol and triglyceride management situation going here by prioritizing a little bit more zone 2. So again, reasons why we don't just hyper focus on one thing, because you might have just heard me talk about the fat loss and you're like, shit, why would I ever do zone 2 ever? There's no point, right? Let me just go super hard and super fast and I'll be super lean. And that's the reality is, yeah, it's going to help that. But we put the zone 2 in here because it's great from a recovery standpoint and it's really great from a lipid utilization standpoint. So basically increasing more of your zone 2 increases lipoprotein lipase, which is literally just an enzyme that helps to break down triglycerides from the bloodstream, right? So the thing we really don't want is we don't want high levels of LDL, and we definitely don't want high levels of triglycerides or VLDLs, which is very low density lipoproteins, right? So we can actually utilize zone 2 training to help manage these levels, which I think is super cool, right? So it's going to help with the fat oxidation, right? So we're using more fat for fuel, which is again going to help lower our blood levels of triglyceride. It can also help improve insulin sensitivity, just like the higher intensity level training will do as well. So this is a similar benefit. When we improve our insulin sensitivity, we have less of this VLDL, which is very low density lipoprotein production, which is not something we want a lot of in the body. So when we're decreasing that VLDL production, that's a great thing. That's exactly the outcome that we want. And then that leads to, again, better triglyceride control, right? And then it also helps to boost HDL. So HDL is the one cholesterol marker that you probably want to see a little on the higher side as opposed to the lower side. So HDL it's probably up in the air a little bit, but potentially somewhat heart health protective, as opposed to LDL like high levels of LDL high levels of triglyceride definitely can, high levels of VLDL definitely can, ApoB, LP, all of these other things, you don't want to see those high, but HDL, you don't mind seeing a little on the higher side. Zone 2 training also helps to increase our HDL levels, which is super cool. So the result we get from doing a little bit more prioritization of the zone 2 training is that we do get some lower fasting triglycerides, we get lower post-meal triglycerides, we get higher HDL, and we get better insulin sensitivity, which is all great things. HIIT doesn't So the more higher intensity trainings doesn't necessarily impact these lipid profiles the same way. It still helps that LPL, that lipoprotein lipase, which is that enzyme to help break it down, but not as consistently. So you'll get a bit of an uptick after a workout, but it's not going to be this extended release like you get from zone 2. So zone 2 is still going to be better from managing a cholesterol standpoint. But here's something, again, super cool that HIIT training will do that the zone 2 won't, is it increases catecholamines, all right? And catecholamines increase fat mobilization. Now, you're probably wondering what exactly is a catecholamine. I just think this is super helpful, super beneficial. So this is super cool, right? So your catecholamines, again, the name's not super important, but norepinephrine, adrenaline, again, if we just kind of go down from the top here, playing a crucial role in fat loss by stimulating fat breakdown and increasing energy expenditure, ultimately promoting fat burning, right? So this is what we're getting a large increase of when we do this more high intensity training. So if you're like me, I'm more of like a zone 3 guy. I don't love doing super high intensity training because it's hard. Like it sucks. But after reading this, I'm definitely going to do more because here's the main things, right? So if we go down at the more detailed explanations here, there's some really cool information, right, about catecholamines bind to receptors in fat cells, triggering the breakdown of stored triglycerides into free fatty acids. It's really breaking down fat, right? Exercise, especially high intensity exercise, can significantly increase catecholamine levels, further promoting fat burning and weight loss. Catecholamines suppress fatty acid purification and increase oxidation in white fat cells. It prevents you from essentially the fat that you're burning as fuel can be taken up into the body and stored again. So that's the whole like, hey, train in your fat burn zone, but you're burning fat, but the fat's not actually making out of the body. It's getting re-esterified and just turned back into fat tissue later on down the line because you're not at a calorie deficit, right? So what we can do here from this high intensity training is you increase these catecholamines and then it suppresses the body's ability to reabsorb these fats basically, right? It increases oxidation, which means that's increasing fat loss, right? Once that fat's oxidized, that's gone. It's getting used for fuel. And here's where you actually get fat loss, right? As opposed to fat use. Two very different things. And then another cool thing here is leptin levels, right? So leptin is your hunger hormones, right? Highly related to satiety, right? So catecholamines can also influence leptin levels, which is the hormone that regulates appetite and energy expenditure, which also helps contribute to weight loss. So there's a lot of really cool benefits here that increasing these catecholamines through your higher intensity training. Again, the high intensity training, not many people do it. You don't see many people doing this in the gym because it sucks, it's hard, it's difficult. You got to get uncomfortable. But it leads to this catecholamine increase, and this is huge for fat loss. And this is huge, especially over the course of time. If we can be promoting an ecosystem that's got more of these catecholamines released in here, we're going to definitely be leading to improved fat loss over the course of time. So this is something I really thought was super interesting for a share. Okay, so with that said, let's wrap this up. Lots of info here. Hopefully you're still with me. Hopefully you're still enjoying it. I don't know about you. I nerd out on this stuff. I love it. I could talk about this all day, as you can tell. VO2 max, this is your longevity biomarker. The more we can increase this VO2 max through some of this higher intensity training, the more we can extend our health span. The longer and better we're going to live, right? Zone 2 is that metabolic foundation. So from zone 2 training, we can build endurance, we can burn a little bit of fat, we can help to regulate our lipid profiles from a cholesterol and triglyceride standpoint, and we can also get some nice insulin sensitivity there as well. And also it's low, slow, easy training that there's not a huge recovery piece from, right? So we can do this in the middle of your workday. If you can walk on a treadmill or ride a bike and answer emails or something for 45 minutes to an hour, we can get that done doing that, right? There's no super huge need for recovery. There's not a ton of stress. It's not going to beat your body up like the intervals are going to do. And then obviously we get all these mitochondrial benefits and stuff. So this is why we want to definitely prioritize some zone 2. Just we want to understand what it's good for and what it's not. Great for a lot of things, not great for being super lean, honestly. So another key takeaway here to remember is that the fat burn zone does not equal the fat loss zone, okay? So it's always going to come down to calories burned versus calories consumed. The higher the intensity of training, obviously the more calories we're going to burn. And then obviously if we can keep our calories consumed a little bit lower, that's going to be super helpful, right? So we can get from that metabolic impact, we're going to get more impact from that higher intensity training in terms of your fat loss, as opposed to training at those low, slow intensities that just aren't burning as many calories. We definitely want to have a combo, right? So that's the other thing here is the combo is best. We want to have some HIIT, we want to have some high intensity stuff, we want to have some zone 2 stuff, because then this way we can manage everything that we're trying to manage from that longevity and performance standpoint. And then obviously we can utilize this for better insulin sensitivity, lower triglyceride levels, increasing our HDL levels, and decreasing LDL levels, really helping improve our metabolic profile. So we're going to have better blood sugar management, better blood pressure, better cholesterol levels, all of the things that we want, right? So that's exactly how we can utilize all these various training methods to really make sure that we're maxing out on our health, on our longevity, and on our body composition all at the same time, all right? Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did like it, give it a share. Feel free to share this one with a friend or somebody that you think needs to hear a little bit about the zone 2 versus the high intensity training. And if you've got anybody who's just into total optimization, please share it with them, because I think this will be really helpful.